Chapter 6, Leviathan Meat at Last. Phew. And with that, we've finished harvesting the last of its organs, Elrond said, dabbing at the sweat on his brow with a rag he kept hung on his belt and dyeing the cloth blue with the Leviathan blood his hands were still covered in. Elrond had a perfectly satisfied smile on his face. He might have been a sorry excuse of an elf, but he was still an elf all the same, and between those classically handsome elven features and the smile on his face, he was practically aglow. I had to admit that it was sort of incredible in every sense of the word that someone could be that happy about having had to do such a gory, brutal job. The man's unbelievably consistent when it comes to his interests, that's for sure. In a certain sense, I had to respect that. It was a job that I never would have been able to handle. In fact, one glance at the Leviathan's intestines getting yanked out of its body had made me nearly lose my lunch or, well, my breakfast, really. I felt a lot more tired than Elrond looked as he moved along to the next stage of the butchering process. I'll be removing the head next. Ordinarily, I would proceed to butcher the head itself afterward, but in this instance, Elrond lowered his voice to explain the situation to me. A Leviathan's skull is full of tremendously valuable components, its eyes, fangs, brain, and the like, which means that it's the most likely part of the monster to be targeted by thieves. Bram has requested that I instead butcher the head indoors at the guild. Oh, that makes sense. We know the guild storehouse is big enough for the head to fit, so there's no reason not to do it there. Now then, I will begin the removal forthwith, Elrond said before raising the sword he'd borrowed from me aloft, then slicing the Leviathan's head clean off. Oh, I wish I could process it right now. What a terrible shame, he muttered as he stroked the monster's severed head. Mental note: make a point of not listening to Elrond when he talks to himself from now on. It basically always ends up being something super freaky. I'll go ahead and put this away for now, I said. I stepped up to the Leviathan's head and stowed it in my item box for safekeeping. Ah, Elrond quietly moaned, reaching a longing hand out toward the head as it vanished away. It was decided that I'd keep hold of both the monster's head as well as the portion of its neck that Gunn had bitten into in my item box for the time being, then drop them off at the Adventurers Guild on my way home. Just don't go thinking you can take it easy for the rest of the day, I said. I know Moira isn't around right now, but if you slack off and don't get any work done, she'll chew you out again the next time you see her. I am well aware. I'll do my part, I promise, Elrond replied. Will he, really? I'm not so sure. The local Adventurers Guild had been absolutely swamped with inquiries, and was more or less in a state of barely controlled chaos. Bram and the other bigwigs didn't have even a second to spare, and Moira had been forced to temporarily step away from her role as Elrond's babysitter to back them up. And, wait, backing the conversation up a few steps. Hey, remember what you said about thieves targeting the Leviathan's head? Is that really something we have to worry about? Like, would anyone dare to even try with this many high-ranking adventurers standing guard? I asked. And that's not even starting on fells and guns barriers. Plus, I didn't hear about any would-be thieves turning up yesterday. I'd been pretty worried about the possibility at first, but since nobody had made an attempt, I'd sort of figured that the incredibly heavy security had scared them all off. I'm afraid to say it is. Regrettably, more than a few people have tried already, Elrond replied. As it turned out, I simply hadn't been paying close enough attention. There had been thieves, a frankly astonishing number of them, in fact, which the adventurers had been apprehending. Gunn and Dora-chan had captured a decent number as well, supposedly. Come to think of it, those two took off pretty much the second we arrived at the worksite today. They said they were keeping watch again, but I sort of figured they were just running away from you-know-who. Neither of them had said a word to me about having caught so many prospective criminals. Apparently, the potential to score a massive windfall by selling a single piece of a monster was simply too good for a lot of people to pass up, no matter how many guards there were around said monster. I just didn't get it. Who could look at a group of adventurers like that and not give up on the spot? Fortunately, we do have the adventurers to stand guard. We'll trust them to handle security while we move on to skinning the creature, at long last. Thankfully, Expert butchers from all across the guild's network have traveled here to help with that stage, Elrond explained. And indeed, I saw that a whole host of butchers were starting to gather around him as we were speaking. He must have already put out the word that it was time for them to get to work. Oh, hey, there's Johann. He seemed to notice me and gave me a wave, which I returned. A moment later, however, he dropped right back into serious mode and moved along. The man was a true professional. Bram and the rest of the higher-ups apparently wanted the Leviathan's skin to be removed in pieces that were as big as possible. That meant that a large number of butchers would have to work together in tandem to pull the task off. Doing the whole monster in one piece just wasn't feasible, given its size, so Elrond started by walking along its length, slicing it into pieces with my magic sword. Clusters of butchers would then gather around each chunk and start working to remove its skin, which they did with astonishing speed and efficiency. I could really tell that they were all seasoned veterans of their craft. Watching the Leviathan's enormous form be gradually skinned was a pretty breathtaking spectacle. I wasn't the only one fixated on it either. Fel was lying nearby, watching with his eyes wide and his breath bated as the monster's white flesh was exposed. Today, at long last, we shall feast on Leviathan, Fel said, his tail wagging furiously. Sway's really excited too, the slime chimed in with a happy little bounce. I hope you guys are right. I would have hated to disappoint them after they got this excited. I'll have to think up a good meal plan in advance. The work carried on in much the same manner until finally, it was called to a close for the day. They hadn't been able to remove all of the Leviathan's skin in the end, but several of the sections it had been cut up into had been fully skinned, leaving their glossy, whitish flesh fully revealed. Good. We shall claim the pieces that have been skinned, Fel declared. Tonight, we dine on Leviathan. At long last, its meat is ours. Fel was, to say the least, very eager for dinner. He was literally drooling in anticipation. Yai! Leviathan meat! Sway squealed in a sing-song tone as well. Its expectations were sky-high too. Just then, Gun and Dora-chan returned from their overhead vigil. Oh! I see the meat is finally ready for us to consume, Gun said. Woohoo! Frigging finally. Feels like we've been waiting for years, Dora-chan chimed in. Well, hurry and collect the meat. We shall return home at once, Fel said as he prodded my back with his nose. Okay, you don't have to push me, sheesh, I replied. However, before we could do that, I figured that I should check in with Elrond first. Hey, Elrond, are those pieces of meat ready for us to take home yet? Elrond gave me a genuinely horrified, wide-eyed stare. No, absolutely not, he shouted in such an openly menacing tone, I was actually taken aback. What? Fel said in a low growl, his snout wrinkling as he bared his teeth slightly. What could there be to explain? The butchering process isn't finished yet, Elrond replied. He hadn't even flinched in the face of Fel's intimidating aura. Not finished. Its meat has been bared. What else could there be to accomplish? How could you possibly not know? It's bones. It's still full of bones, isn't it? Oh, right. He actually does have a point. They hadn't deboned the monster at all, and it was pretty easy to guess that those bones would be just as valuable as the rest of its anatomy. Fel kept insisting that the meat had to be ready for cooking now that it was exposed, but I had to admit that Elrond's explanation made a lot of sense. The bones are no obstacle. He can simply prepare the meat bone-in style. That is an option, is it not? Oh, come on, Fel. Did you really have to pull me into this? Mukouda, Elrond exclaimed, grabbing me by the shoulders and shaking me wildly. Why you aren't about to tell me that you actually plan to cook the Leviathan, bones and all, are you? Whoa, hold your horses. Calm down, Elrond, please. I shouted back. I guess I technically could cook it that way if I wanted to, but I never said a word about that being my plan. You could. How could you even say that? Nope, it's no use. He's worked himself into a total frenzy. Listen to me, Mukouda. As I told you before, Even a single drop of a Leviathan's blood or a single fragment of one of its bones would sell for a tremendous price. They're unbelievably high-quality materials. Why would you even entertain the possibility of throwing its bones on a grill? Those are valuable even by Leviathan material standard. They can be made into arms or medicine. Supposedly, Leviathan bones could be crafted into swords, spears, or even bludgeoning weapons. They could also be ground into a powder, which turned them into a potent ingredient for medicines of all sorts. They were a material that any craftsperson would want to get their hands on, and Elrond spent nearly an hour lecturing me about how completely absurd it was to even consider using them as part of a meal. My familiars tried to quietly excuse themselves a short way into his tirade, but for once, they weren't so lucky. Where do you think you're going? You four need to hear this as much as he does. Elrond had barked, and just like that, they were in for the long haul right along with me. Serves you right, Fel. When Elrond finally wrapped his speech up, all of us scurried away without wasting a moment. Grr! How dare that elf preach to a mighty Fenrir, Fel bitterly grumbled. That was altogether unpleasant, yes, Gun tiredly agreed. Yeah, and why did I get dragged into it? Dora-chan weakly griped. Mastir, Sway's Huangry Sway chimed in. One of us was behaving more or less the same as ever, at least. Ugh, I'm beat. Man, though, who knew that Elrond had it in him to lecture a Fenrir and an ancient dragon like it was nothing when he was mad? Guess he's a guy you should never underestimate. The day after Elrond had taught us that painful lesson on the value of Leviathan bones, the guild's butchers continued to work on removing the Leviathan's skin. It was a momentous task, and it ended up spilling over into the day after that as well, once again putting my familiar's long-awaited Leviathan meat meal on hold. Fel, Gan, Dora-chan, and Sway's spirits could hardly have been lower. Fel was particularly surly. He had a perpetual scowl on his face, and when I offered to cook whatever he wanted to make up for the delay, he replied with the single grunted word courage. That was a favorite for all of my familiars, so I went ahead and whipped up a batch that evening for dinner. The one problem, everyone was still deeply upset about not getting to eat the Leviathan, and they seemed to take their frustration out on the meal. They ate, and ate, and ate, quicker than I could even fry the stuff, and I ended up running out of poultry equivalents to make more with before they were finished. I was forced to dip into my dungeon pork and beef reserves to cook up cutlets for them instead, and by the end of the meal, I was as exhausted as I'd ever been. The day after, the skinning process finally came to an end and the deboning process began. They didn't get all that far, relatively speaking, but they did manage to remove all the bones from one section of the monster, which meant that its meat was finally ready to be handed over to us, for real this time. The fact that my familiars had made it very clear that they wanted to eat the stuff as soon as possible had probably been a pretty big motivating factor. Fel and Gun all but menaced the butchers, really, and the guild staff had somehow managed to grant that wish in the end. And so, 4 days after the Leviathan's butchering began, we'd finally secured a portion of Leviathan meat, albeit a relatively small one. Unfortunately, and to be clear, I had seen this coming a mile away. The second the meat was in my hands, my familiars started kicking up a fuss, urging me to head home right away. I'd been planning on taking a moment to talk to Elrond and Johann before I left, but Fel grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and threw me onto his back before I even had the chance to try. Sway was already sitting in my bag, perhaps to ensure it would be ready to go at a moment's notice, while Gan and Dora-chan said that they'd go on ahead and had already headed back to the capital even earlier than the rest of us. That was how I ended up clinging to Fel's back as he raced through the streets of the capital so quickly, you'd think there wasn't a moment to spare. I told him to stop, but he ignored me, so instead I tried shouting, "Slow down, or so help me, I won't cook any of the Leviathan meat tonight," out of desperation. That got him to lower his pace, at least, but he still took me straight to the house we were renting in the capital anyway, now grumbling all the while. The instant I stepped inside, I was herded straight into the kitchen without even a moment to rest. For crying out loud. They could have let me take it easy for a couple minutes, at least, I griped to myself as I thought through my options for the evening's meal. If I make something that takes too long to cook, those four are gonna riot. Plus, I'd really rather whip up something simple and be done with it, anyway. Fellengen said that Leviathan tastes a lot like ice dragon, but I dunno, I thought. Looking at the Leviathan meat, which I'd already removed from my item box, it did have that same whitefish-esque quality that I'd seen in the ice dragon meat. That said, when I prodded the Leviathan meat, I noted that it felt at least a little more plump and malleable than the dragon meat had. Guess a quick taste test is always the right place to start with new ingredients like this, I said. I sliced off a very small portion of the meat, salted and peppered it, and then quickly cooked it up in a frying pan. It still looked like the ice dragon meat after it was cooked, and I wondered if it would also taste like cod as I popped it into my mouth. Whoa! Now that's really something. The meat really was similar to the ice dragons in some ways. It had that same nice, flaky texture. That said, its flavor was completely different. Its umami was out of this world, to the point that I could barely even describe it in words. It was like all the tastiest whitefish I'd ever eaten put together, then cranked up to 150%. I mean, it was just plain good. I could probably get away with serving it up as is, but that feels like a bit of a waste, I said to myself. I bet this would go amazingly with all sorts of sauces. I could make a manière, or even just grill it with some butter and soy sauce, a pretty obvious way to go, sure, but an awesome one. Oh, or I could do a butter lemon sauce. What else? Oh, of course. This might work really well with that seasoning I saw on my online supermarket the other day. The seasoning in question had come into stock just recently. I'd realized I was almost out of ketchup, opened my skills menu to stock up, and randomly stumbled across a new product in the process. It was a tomato-based sauce made by a company that was famous for its ketchup, and its description claimed that it would brighten up any dish with a burst of delicious flavor. I'd been thinking of using it on something, and this seemed like a perfect chance. There were 3 different varieties of the sauce, which meant it'd be pretty flexible, and since making tomato sauce from scratch could be such a pain, it seemed like it could expand my easy cooking repertoire quite a bit. Plus, most importantly of all, my instincts were telling me that it had to be tasty. That brand's ketchup and canned tomatoes had always served me well in the past, so I had faith that the new sauce would be a winner as well. Alright, I think I know what to make. I'll go with a simple Leviathan manière, to start. I quickly bought up the extra ingredients I'd need from my online supermarket, including the tomato sauce made by the famous ketchup brand. That should do it. Now then, first things first. I started by lightly seasoning the pieces of Leviathan meat with salt and pepper, then coating them with flour and shaking off any excess. Next, I melted some salted butter in a few frying pans, into which I laid the pieces of Leviathan meat, cooking them until both sides were nice and crispy. I pulled the cooked meat out at that point and got ready to use the same pans to make the sauce in. I'll go with butter and soy sauce for this pan's batch, I think. And this one can be the butter lemon sauce, I muttered. Salted butter and a splash of soy were all that was in the first sauce I was preparing. Once those 2 ingredients were nicely combined, it was good to go. The butter lemon sauce was simple as well. It started out with some salted butter too, followed by lemon juice, salt, and a bit of coarsely ground black pepper. Freshly grinding pepper really does make a difference. What an aroma, I said. I was using a brand of black pepper that came packaged in its own little pepper mill. Products like that made me more grateful than ever to have access to my online supermarket. Once the butter lemon sauce was all mixed together, I moved on to the tomato sauce manière. I didn't think that butter and the tomato sauce would work well together, it'd come out too heavy, so I cooked the Leviathan for that dish in olive oil instead. The sauce didn't need any extra work at all, so all I really had to do was crisp up the Leviathan, at which point. Okay, I think this is ready. My voice, it seemed, had carried farther than I'd expected it to. No sooner had the words left my mouth than Fel, Gan, Dora-chan, and Sway came crashing into the kitchen like a raging avalanche of fur, scales, and slime. It is finished. Good. Let us eat at once. Finally, a taste of Leviathan. It's been far too long. Tell me about it. The wait was killing me. Leviathan meat. Yai. Okay, back it up. I'll bring it out to you, so go wait in the living room, I scolded. Honestly, talk about overexcited, I thought, holding back a chuckle as I watched them plod back out of the kitchen. Just a few minutes later, I brought out the plates of Leviathan meunier to serve to everyone. I decided to make a few simple meuniers this time, I explained. This one uses a butter soy sauce, this one's a butter lemon sauce, and this one doesn't have a sauce yet, Butte. I brought out my secret ingredient, the 3 varieties of tomato sauce I'd purchased. One of them was a fairly standard sauce made with onions and crushed tomatoes, one had a ton of garlic in it and was supposedly very flavorful, and one was made with a base of tomatoes and red peppers and was slightly spicy. Apparently, that last one was based on Brava's sauce, which originated in Spain. I topped everyone's currently sauceless Leviathan pieces with a little of each flavor. Oh, actually, Sway, the Brava's sauce, that's this one, is a little spicy. Maybe we should skip that one for you? I suggested. I'd taste-tested a dab of the sauce, and it definitely had a decent kick. I had a feeling that it might be a bit much for Sway's childish palate. Oh, but Sway wants to try all of them, Sway complained. Okay, but just a little to start. If you end up liking it, I'll put more on the rest of them. Okay. With that, everyone had a grand total of 5 flavors of meunier to sample. The gluttonous quartet wasted no time digging right in. Ah, yes. Leviathan meat is truly as delectable as I remember, Fell said. Yes, indeed it is. This flavor matches my memories of this meat precisely, but my liege's cooking has made it all the better, Gun agreed. Holy crap, this stuff's awesome, Dora-chan exclaimed. Leviathan meat's so yummy, Sway chimed in. Their long wait for Leviathan meat had finally paid off, and clearly, it was living up to even their hyperinflated expectations. They polished off their first portions in the blink of an eye and asked for seconds right away. The Brava's sauce really did turn out to be a bit too spicy for Sway, by the way, so it asked for the 4 non-spicy sauces for its second serving. I think it's time for me to dig in too. I went straight for the tomato sauce dishes, which I'd been excited to try since the idea had sprung into my mind. I started with the basic tomato sauce version, which turned out to be really refreshing, with the perfect amount of acidic bite. Yeah, that's as good as I thought it'd be. Next, I sampled the more strongly flavored garlic sauce meunier. Oh, this one's great too. It's hitting all the right flavor notes for me. Let's give the Brava's sauce a try next. Yup, that's got a bit of a punch. Really tasty, though. It's got that spicy kick that kids like Sway just can't quite appreciate yet. It's really good, though in fact, all of them are, and I bet they'd be even better with some bread on the side. Fortunately, I had plenty of Teresa's homemade sourdough stashed in my item box. I brought out a loaf, cut myself a slice, and dipped it in the tomato sauce. Yup, just as good as I thought it'd be. I moved from the bread to the meunier, then right back to the bread again. It made for a dangerous combination if I wasn't careful. It felt like I'd just keep eating forever, or I might have, if it weren't for the fact that it was only a matter of time before I'd be interrupted. Hey, I require another serving of these too, at once, Fell demanded, gesturing at the garlic tomato sauce and Brava's sauce meuniers. Yeah, no surprises there. Those would be the ones that Fell would be into. More for me as well, my liege. These two suit my taste, Gun said, indicating the butter soy meunier and the plain tomato sauce meunier. He'd taken a liking to the most basic flavors, it seemed. They're basic for a reason, I guess. Nothing beats the classics. More for me too. I'll take these, Dora-chan added. He picked the butter lemon sauce and the Brava's sauce as his favorites. I can get behind that. The lemon really brings something out in the dish, and it's light in a way that makes the strong, spicy Brava's sauce taste even better in comparison. Sway wants more too. All of them. Ha ha ha. All of them except the spicy one, I'm guessing. That slime's appetite never fails to impress. I served everyone their third helpings, and barely a few minutes later, all 4 of their voices rang out in unison. More. Already? They were eating at an even more rapid pace than usual. Maybe the lengthy wait explained why they were scarfing it down so quickly. My hunger is nowhere near sated. I assume you have prepared an ample stock of the Leviathan's meat for us? Fell asked as he polished off his portion, then licked his lips. I'm still hungry as well, my liege. Same here. I've never had this stuff before, and I want to make my first impression as complete as possible. Sway can eat lots and lots and lots more too. I'll, go cook up a bit more, I replied, my eyebrow twitching slightly. The gluttonous quartet, it seemed, was going to keep me locked in the kitchen for most of the evening. The 5th day of the butchering process had arrived, and now that they'd had their long-awaited Leviathan meal, my familiars were finally acting a little more chill about the whole deal, though of course, they were still insisting that we'd have another Leviathan meat feast for dinner that evening as well. I was glad that they weren't being as uncomfortably on edge about it anymore, but we clearly still had a lot of work to do when it came to their obstinacy. I was the one who'd have to make that feast, after all, and I'd already spent the night before cooking. Who even knew how many servings of meuniere? I'd ended up so tired that I'd barely had the chance to eat my own helping of Leviathan meat in peace. Knowing that I'd probably be going through that whole experience all over again had me feeling deeply dejected, not that moping would help me avoid my unfortunate fate. The butchering team would be spending most of the day deboning the remaining chunks of the Leviathan's body, it seemed. That was what Elrond said, anyway, and he was technically in charge of the project, so it was probably safe to take his word for it. As a side note, if Elrond was tired out by his work at all, he sure wasn't letting it show. He'd arrived at the worksite with a huge smile on his face, day after day, and seemed no less lively than he'd been on day one. Anyway, I knew that if they were deboning more of the meat chunks today, that meant that I'd be given a much larger stock of Leviathan meat at the end of it than had been handed over to me the day before. The gluttonous quartet had put 2 and 2 together as well, and were already preemptively celebrating our upcoming meaty windfall. Ugh. It's gonna be another rough evening, all right. If Willem had been around, I could have griped to him, which might have made me feel a bit better, but he was so busy he hadn't even made it back to the house the night before. I'd run into him when I arrived at the butchering site that morning and had managed to grab him for a very quick chat, during which he'd explained that he'd spent the night at the capital's Adventurers Guild Hall. According to Willem, I'm so busy right now that sleeping at the guild just makes sense. It's more efficient that way, and it means that even if you do get into trouble again, I won't be around to get sucked into your mess. I was a little confused by that, like, what sort of trouble would I even be getting into? But Willem quickly clarified by asking, you would have fed me part of the Leviathan if I'd gone back to the house last night, right? Well, yeah, I replied. My familiars would never have let me get away with not cooking something with it, and I wouldn't have denied Willem his dinner. Well, imagine if word got out that I ate part of the Leviathan that's been the talk of the nation lately, hell, the talk of all the nations in this part of the continent. Have you considered how that could turn out for me? Okay, but you ate dragon meat the other night, didn't you? I countered. Ooh. Let's just say that I've learned from experience, Willem said. Wait, what's that supposed to mean? And besides, even if he ate part of the Leviathan, he'd be doing it with my permission. Why would anyone have any right to complain about him eating something that I'd made for my own party and willingly shared with him? And who would even complain about something that petty in there? Oh, right. Him. I did know one person, specifically, one elf, who would probably react to the news that Willem had sampled the Leviathan's meat by throwing a bawling, screaming fit about how he wanted to try it too. It was incredibly easy to visualize, not to mention distressing, and with that factor in mind, I couldn't argue with Willem's logic. Unfortunately for him, it's pretty much set in stone that we'll be eating Leviathan again tonight. And speaking of which, I spent quite some time after that point staring at the massive chunks of skinned Leviathan meat, muttering to myself as I racked my brain for a good recipe that I could use it in that evening. That evening, I was once again herded straight into the kitchen the instant we got back to the house I was renting in the capital. No resting time for me. I had settled on a recipe, at least, but I had my doubts about the situation's sustainability. Are they gonna keep demanding Leviathan meat every single night from now on, or what? I muttered to myself. Just remembering the mountain of meat that now occupied my item box made my spirits sink. Even considering the black holes that my familiars had for stomachs, it would still probably take ages for me to work through it all. And as if that wasn't bad enough, there's still more of it coming. Much to my chagrin, the deboning process wasn't even halfway finished yet. That, of course, meant that I'd soon have even more Leviathan meat on my hands, in massive quantities. I shivered. Why, you know what? I'm just not gonna think about it right now. They'll get sick of it eventually, anyway. If anyone else had heard me talking about getting sick of Leviathan meat, they might very well have passed out on the spot. I, however, found myself praying internally that the gluttonous quartet would move on to their next food fixation sooner rather than later as I got to work on the night's dinner. This time, I'd be making foil-baked Leviathan. I'd have to make a metric ton of whatever dish I settled on, so I decided to prioritize simplicity above all else. Baking the meat in foil meant that I could throw in a bunch of vegetables and stuff as well, which I was positive would be delicious. I purchased the ingredients that I didn't have in stock from my online supermarket, then got straight to work. First up was cutting the vegetables. I had a ton of onions and cabbage from Alban's garden in my item box, and brought out some of each to use in the dish. I sliced the onions thinly, cut the cabbage into chunks, and removed the bases of the enoki mushrooms that I'd bought from my online supermarket. Once I'd finished cutting the veritable mountain of vegetables I needed, I moved right along to making the sauce. I'd settled on using 2 sauces to make 2 variants of the recipe I'd chosen, a ponzu soy sauce and miso mayonnaise. The ponzu soy sauce would go on right before I served the dish, so I started by making the miso mayo. Not that there was much of a process to that at all, really. All I had to do was mix together miso paste, mayonnaise, and just a splash of concentrated dashi stock. Once the miso mayo was ready, I started prepping the dish itself. I buttered a piece of aluminum foil, then arranged the ingredients on top of it. I started with a layer of onions and cabbage, salted and peppered them, and then slapped on a piece of Leviathan meat, which I topped with more onions and cabbage, plus some mushrooms this time. After that, I just had to top some of the piles with pats of butter, top the rest with miso mayo, and fold them all up into little parcels. Then, once I had a ton of those parcels made, I threw them into the oven to bake. I spent quite some time baking one oven full of parcels after another, until finally. Okay, I think that should be enough to satisfy everyone. I was hoping to actually sit down and enjoy my meal that night, so I made even more servings than I thought I would actually need. Getting sent back into the kitchen like last night would spoil my chance to savor my own Leviathan meat, after all. Considering just how many parcels I'd put together, each of which contained an extra-large helping of Leviathan meat, I had a hard time imagining that I could possibly run out. I returned to the living room, where my familiars were hungrily waiting for me. I made foil-baked Leviathan for us today. You just open it up like this. Ouch, hot, I said. I tore open one of the foil parcels, and the buttery aroma of its contents immediately filled the room. Oh, and there's 2 types. These ones will go great with a bit of this ponzu soy sauce on top, and these are a bit more heavily seasoned and have miso mayo sauce on them. They're all really hot, so be careful. This is so yummy, Master, said Sway, who had no trouble eating even the most boiling hot of dishes. It engulfed its foil-baked Leviathan without waiting for so much as a second. Judging by the slime's happy jiggle, it was really pleased with the dish. Yes, these are both delicious. I'm not certain I could pick a favorite, Gun agreed as he chowed down as well. They both good, yeah, but I think I like the stronger flavored one better, Dora-chan said. The miso mayo parcels seemed to have hit the spot for him. Fell, meanwhile, gave my other 3 familiars a reproachful side eye as he used wind magic to cool his parcels down. That delayed him quite a bit, but finally, he dug in too. Yes, this is quite decent, he said. The vegetables were unnecessary, but the Leviathan's meat is truly superb. Unnecessary, my foot. Veggies are a core component of any foil bake. Plus, they're just plain good. I opened up a parcel to sample as well. I started out with one of the miso mayo ones, which I paired with a bowl of white rice. Strongly flavored dishes like that went perfectly with rice. I could hardly think of a better combination. The Leviathan was delicious, needless to say, but the way the vegetables had soaked up the flavor from it and the miso mayo made them incredibly tasty as well. It was so good, in fact, that I ended up seriously considering having a second helping of rice, but before I got the chance, the gluttonous quartet called out for seconds of their own. Heh. You won't be sending me back to the kitchen this time. I made enough to last us through the meal today for sure, I said as I brought out another round of foil-baked Leviathan parcels. Oh, then I suppose we will have to test the limits of your preparations. Ha. Excellent, my liege. In that case, I'll eat even more than usual. You said it. Sway's gonna eat way more than last night. I had made a terrible mistake. One misplaced comment, and the gluttonous quartet was all fired up to stuff their stomachs to capacity. No, wait, that's not what I meant at all. Be reasonable. Eat as much as you want, then stop, I shouted in a flailing panic. Incidentally, my liege, might I partake of the liquor you provided the other night? I believe you called it beer, perhaps? I'm quite certain it would pair wonderfully with this dish, Gun said. Oh, no fair. In that case, Sway wants the black bubbly stuff to drink too, Sway protested. You mean cola, Sway, and I'll second that. One for me too, Dora-chan said. And I shall have cider. Also, another serving. Oh, for me as well. Same. Sway too. Hey, guys, are you listening to me? I'm serious. Don't overeat. Be reasonable, please.